Part 5 of the 2-year anniversary show of Straight Shooting News. This will be episode 12 of The Awakening, the BRICS Deception. The constitutional freedoms survived the onslaught of national authoritarians. So, in part 5, we're going to be showing you the divide and conquer aspect of all this. In this part, we will hear repeated propaganda and lies coming from the Toadies of the Eastern Culture. And keep in mind, this is the same Eastern culture that we've been referring to through many of our shows, that on the very day that the U.S. was born, and our founders created a constitutional form of government with inalienable rights, these same Eastern cultures were plotting to take us down from that very day because it's a threat to their existence. As Smile told you about communism, communism is paranoid because they know they can't exist with a free culture. We're going to give you something about the BRICS to the rescue. Yeah. And can you be fooled? That's the important part. And you got to understand, we showed you in the first 2 parts, we start off with the same clip from Nixon. We went off the gold standard and we were going to back our currency with commodities, just like Britain is claiming to do. Commodities of value. That was the whole aspect. Now, let's see. I'm going to go with that.
The U.S. stance on the U.S. dollar is campaigning its friends and partners to consider other monetary systems. At the same time, the impacts of the war between Russia and Ukraine foster a climate where efforts to establish a parallel and alternative financial system to the current global financial system can advance more quickly. The choice to join the BRICS, an association of Russia, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa, in this scenario will be a game-changing one for Middle Eastern nations like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, a step that might irrevocably alter the balance of power in the world. But what are the implications of the U.A.E. and Saudi Arabia joining BRICS? How strong will the BRICS alliance grow with these 2 nations included? And how will the West respond to such a move? Russia-Ukraine war intensified a global trend aimed at building alternative economic and financial systems parallel to the current one. Divided into 2 sizable blocks if the BRICS grows stronger. The Western side, which now has sway over the global economy's levers, will take the lead first. While having Brazil among them, the bloc also includes Japan and Australia, and the Eastern power basis is created by the BRICS economies. This portends impending geopolitical rivalry that will be more intense. A major development that would have a significant impact on international relations is the addition of oil-producing nations, which would give the group 31% of the world's oil output, simply because the world will see the merging of the biggest energy producers and consumers, BRICS. Furthermore, the firm has more influence over international commerce because of the existence of important economic and logistical hubs. The West is making an effort to defend the historical positions it gained after World War II and to thwart any changes to the way the world economy is organized. Meantime, neglecting and failing to take into account the important developments, committing error after mistake. As a result, it has lost a sizable number of followers with important political and economic influence. Due to significant changes in the geopolitical and economic balance of power, as well as the rise of new economic powers and the fall of others, the current economic system and its components, established 80 years ago, is no longer viable. If the world is to prevent new wars from impeding the establishment of a just international order, this reality must be adequately recognized.
Is that the BRICS grouping, including possible new members, is very much in the orbit of China and Russia, with the G7, including the EU and the U.S., losing tractional power among them. Western influence also seems to be fading as the BRICS alliance continues to grow and attract membership pleas from around the globe, Recently, we learned that over 24 nations are showing interest in BRICS, and the numbers seem to be growing. We also know that Bangladesh, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates have all just joined the BRICS New Development Bank, with many more nations on the way. It would seem that the G7 consistent failures on several fronts is costing the West a key strategic position of global dominance as the BRICS Plus alliance continues to garner support and solidarity all over the globe. So is BRICS finally taking over global economic leadership from the G7 alliance? And is Western global influence diminishing in favor of the East? The G7, which includes the EU and the U.S., appears to be losing traction in the world, and this is due to a variety of factors, including an overall mistrust of U.S. foreign policy, a desire to ring-fence against sanctions by forming an alternative trade bloc to the G7, what is perceived as EU greed in global markets, and long-held animosity against various European legacies from colonial times. It is also expected to usher in the long-debated transition from a unilateral global basis led by the U.S. to a multipolar one led by the main BRICS economies. The G7's recent announcement of an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative smells of power politics rather than a genuine desire to assist the developing world. The West appears to engage only in moral posturing. If the debauchery in Iraq and Afghanistan are any indication, it holds no officials accountable and frequently destroys invaded countries. While one would expect some humility from those defeats, the virtue signaling surrounding the Ukraine-Russia conflict, as well as desperate attempts to persuade and at times force nations to choose a side, demonstrate that they are back to their old ways. The West is working hard, but with little success, to change the narrative surrounding the Ukraine-Russia conflict to one of imperialism. Former colonies have not agreed with that assessment. Surprisingly, former colonizers are quick to refer to it as such. Commentators in the Western world are dismissing the struggles of former colonies through this lens. All of this is happening as the BRICS nations come to the aid of poor nations. The agenda for the BRICS meeting is an example. Former colonies and developing economies around the world do not want to compete for moral high ground. They see the Ukraine-Russia conflict as a bilateral conflict. More than who was right and who was wrong in the European conflict, the economic fallout was a major concern for them. Rising oil and gas prices, double-digit inflation, and a global economy on the verge of recession keep leaders awake at night more than a European conflict. Nonetheless, it was Indonesian President Joko Widodo who initiated Ukraine-Russia peace talks by inviting Vladimir Putin to the G20. Western leaders, on the other hand, have been using the conflict to break Russia. The West's intentions appear to revolve around containing rather than including the developing world. Unless and until the G7 includes permanent members from the global south, it will look exactly like it did 100 years ago, when these same countries were colonizers. On the other hand, we see the BRICS expansion strategy and how global power conflict is fueling the BRICS expansion push. In the midst of China-US tensions, the desire to build a larger BRICS has grown stronger than ever. Soon after Chinese President Xi Jinping emphasized the importance of speeding up the BRICS expansion process at the 14th BRICS leaders meeting in late June in Beijing, Iran and Argentina announced that they had submitted formal applications to the BRICS. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Egypt, Indonesia, Nigeria, Senegal, the United Arab Emirates, Thailand, and other guest countries attended the first BRICS foreign ministers meeting in May. All of these positive actions are clear indications that the BRICS expansion is accelerating. The main reasons for BRICS expansion can be attributed to three factors. First, the intense East-West conflict. Second, the deepening of BRICS Plus cooperation. And third, demands from node countries. As emerging economies and regional great powers, the BRICS countries have a strong incentive to bring other node countries with key strategic locations and thriving economies into the fold. The more heated the East-West conflict, the greater the impetus for BRICS expansion. The meeting of foreign ministers was the main attraction at the start of BRICS, after which a declaration was issued. Despite the fact that BRICS was later upgraded to a leaders' summit, the practice of issuing declarations following the meeting has continued. China's donation of reserve funds to the BRICS New Development Bank was another notable event. Following that, BRICS Plus cooperation gradually expanded to include economic and trade exchanges, political security, and people-to-people and cultural exchanges. Following the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the BRICS countries established a Vaccine Research and Development Center on March 22, 2022. Putting the BRICS Plus cooperation on a solid footing. As a result, these countries are eager to join the BRICS alliance.
Let's take that apart for it. There was a lot said there. Now think about this. The war in Ukraine, as I told you, set this off, set up the stage for it, coordinated with Communist China. That was a broadcast from WION from India. This is what they're putting out. They had a lot of great points there, which is what we're showing us there. We have a new international order. Oil producing nations are joining the BRICS coalition. The Petro Dollar, the fake accusations of climate change. Think about that, on how they're using this power play in the U.S. and the free countries. U.S. energy is the most important. We're dominant. This whole scheme of BRICS and this global takeover by the communist Chinese and their yuan, it's falling apart. We need to be energy independent. We need to be producing at a high rate so we can take care of our allies if we have any left by the time Mr. Chocolate Chip Ice Cream Biden is done trying to destroy us and hand us over to this global alliance. You know, the U.S. is, and the other nations in the G7, they're focused on woke policies. Think about that. At a time when the world's coming at us, people are worried about being woke. You understand the threat of this wokeness? Time to stop playing games with these people. You know, imperialism, colonialism. It sounds like Obama. We're all such terrible people. And we want to colonize the world and control them. Obama dreams of his father was destruction of the U.S. We survived 8 years of him. Trump brought us back, just like Reagan brought us back for the 4 horrible years of Carter. What, with this Biden thing? It's way too much. But we can do this. We need to ride this out and just eject these people. So, what they're selling with their propaganda is BRICS. They're going to help all the poor nations with no strings attached. What they're doing is they're taking the Taft dollar diplomacy, but instead of just trying to help other nations and protect them and protect the hemisphere, the world's grown smaller with all the communications since our founders were there, even the Taft administration. There wasn't that bad with strings attached. It wasn't until Wilson came next and wanted to build democracies. And like I told you in the previous show, not all countries function well as democracies, but as independent nations, they can do just fine. Here's what you really need to think about. I jotted this down. So, what is BRICS all about? BRICS is going to turn around. They're going to give the Chinese control. Now, you actually have to think about what kind or what form of government, if you have to, some form of government, protection of my founders got together, would you prefer a communist Chinese style form of totalitarian and authoritarian rule? Well, they don't even think twice about executing you, or a constitutional form where things aren't perfect, but you have the right to fight back and change them. I don't know who they're trying to kid, but if you buy into the propaganda, well, then you've got a serious problem. Your problem is now becoming every other free person across the globe's problem. Let's take a look at what's happening with Nigeria and how they're playing it there. Let's see if you see any similarities.
Hands into Nigeria. Nigeria is set to join BRICS Plus. BRICS will continue to advocate for equitable representation in international decision-making and to support global economic recovery post-COVID-19. The BRICS bloc is chaired by a sitting president of each member country in the order of the BRICS acronym, with India PM Narendra Modi chairing in 2021, China President Xi Jinping in 2022, and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa taking the lead on January 1 this year. As BRICS chairperson this year, Ramaphosa would be in charge of the bloc's expansion if new members were admitted. During the 14th BRICS summit, held in late June 2022, Jinping announced that Iran and Argentina had submitted applications to join the bloc. These announcements were followed by media reports that Indonesia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Nigeria, Kazakhstan, Senegal, and Thailand were also interested in joining BRICS. Nigeria has the largest economy in Africa. Services are the largest economic sector, accounting for roughly half of total GDP. Information and communication, which account for roughly 10% of total output, are among the fastest growing service sectors. Agriculture, which was previously the largest sector, now accounts for approximately 23% of the economy. Despite being the two most important exports, natural gas and crude oil account for only 11% of total GDP. Nigeria's GDP increased by 3.54% year-on-year in the second quarter of 2022, exceeding market expectations of 2.6% growth and the prior quarter's 3.11% increase. Because of its size and young population, Nigeria has the untapped potential to become the economic center of Africa and the world. Nigeria has one of the world's highest proportions of young people. 53.7% of its population is between the ages of 15 and 65, with a median age of 18. The allure of Nigeria's sizable consumer market, aided by import substitution regulations, has resulted in clusters of manufacturing investment focused on the construction and real estate industries, as well as household items. Nigeria is a major trading and investment partner in Africa for the BRICS countries. Nigeria's economy is the 29th largest in the world in terms of nominal GDP, and the 23rd largest in terms of purchasing power parity. Nigeria's economy is expected to grow at the fastest rate in Africa, with an average annual growth rate of 4.2%. Nigeria, like Brazil, Russia, and South Africa, is endowed with natural resources. Nigeria, for example, is Africa's leading crude oil producer, and Russia is one of the world's energy superpowers. Nigeria has ranked 5th in terms of exports since 2008, Abdullah Shehu, who stated that it is quite realistic in the future. Although accession talks have not yet begun, the ambassador stated that they are possible in the future.
It's the Petro Dollar. As you see, you heard again, emphasized that the U.S. made an agreement with Saudi Arabia in 1945 and allowed the Petro Dollar to grow and the world trade currency to become dependent on it.
Nigeria waited so long to join the BRICS. Though Nigeria is listed as one of the countries that have expressed interest in joining BRICS, a bloc whose goal is to reduce Western dominance and build a new economic order, its membership may be hampered by unique challenges. Experts list the country's low economic complexity, weak productive capacity, and fragile fiscal position as obstacles that must be overcome before it can be enlisted. The organization's popularity has skyrocketed in recent years. Iran and Argentina are said to have expressed interest in joining, as are Bangladesh, Indonesia, Mexico, Turkey, Egypt, Algeria, Sudan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Venezuela, and Nigeria. With frosty relations with traditional development partners, including the International Development Fund, or IMF, many experts have identified the need to pursue an alternative path. To summarize, the Nigerian government is still heavily focused on improving the country's logistics and transportation systems. This is critical for the development of an industrial ecosystem and production supply chains. The key to retaining foreign investment is to provide policy stability, a secure investment environment with the abolition of bureaucratic purgation, and macroeconomic stability.
There you go, there's some more fire. Let's take a little bit of that apart before we get into some even more concerning places they're targeting. What I said, the post-Rona world, COVID-19 world, everybody's coming out of. Well, it's ironic how I think it was October when the Pandora Papers became Yeah, I think the interviews were done. The report is October 2019. The Chinese launched their attack on the world in October 2019. The U.S. had, in the World Economic Forum, had a little convention of event, was 201 in New York, discussing what happened if a pandemic come out. And Trump had the U.S. energy independent. And you put the pieces together to see what's taking place. And here again, if you look at the similarities to what we've been talking about, Nigeria has the second largest economy in Africa. Similar to Mexico having the second largest economy next to Brazil in the southerly part of the Western Hemisphere. And it's located on the U.S. border. The whole key, again, is natural resources and commodities. Most important commodities, it's fuel and energy. And we're being told to go green. The world's about to come after our freedoms. But if that wasn't alarming enough, go this next clip and see who else they're going after using the same propaganda.
Growing interest among some countries in the Asia-Pacific region to join the group, including Australia and New Zealand. If Australia and New Zealand were to join BRICS, there would be several mutual benefits for both sides. Here are some of the ways in which this move could benefit Australia, New Zealand, and the BRICS countries. Australia's potential membership in BRICS could have significant consequences for the West, particularly for its traditional allies in the region. The Western countries, including the United States and the United Kingdom, have long been Australia's closest allies in matters of trade, defense, and foreign policy. Australia's membership in BRICS would undoubtedly raise concerns among its Western allies. For one, the BRICS-Australia partnership would challenge the existing balance of power in the region. The West has traditionally dominated the global economy and politics, and a BRICS-Australia partnership would provide an alternative economic and political bloc that could compete with the West. This could lead to increased tensions and competition between the two groups, potentially leading to a fracturing of the Western alliance. The BRICS countries have been some of the fastest-growing economies in the world in recent years, and their combined GDP is expected to continue to grow at a significant pace. As members of BRICS, Australia and New Zealand would have access to a large and rapidly growing market. By joining the group, Australia and New Zealand would be able to tap into this growth and gain access to new markets for their goods and services. At the same time, BRICS countries would benefit from increased access to the Australian and New Zealand markets. Also, Australia and New Zealand are rich in natural resources, including minerals, energy, and agricultural products. BRICS countries have a growing demand for these resources, and by joining the group, Australia and New Zealand would be able to capitalize on this demand and increase their exports. This would not only benefit the Australian and New Zealand economies, but also provide the BRICS countries with the resources they need to sustain their economic growth. As members of BRICS, Australia and New Zealand would have a stronger voice on the global stage. The group has been vocal in advocating for reform of the global economic and financial system, and by joining the group, Australia and New Zealand would be able to contribute to these efforts. Additionally, the BRICS countries have been working together on issues such as climate change and global health, and by joining the group, Australia and New Zealand would be able to collaborate more closely with these countries on these critical issues. Next, the move could strengthen regional ties. Australia and New Zealand are both members of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC Forum, which promotes free trade and economic cooperation in the region. Despite these challenges, however, the mutual benefits of joining BRICS are significant. By tapping into the economic growth and potential of these countries, Australia and New Zealand would be able to strengthen their own economies and contribute to the growth and development of the region as a whole. At the same time, the BRICS countries would benefit from increased access to the Australian and New Zealand markets as well as countries. Another potential drawback of a partnership between BRICS and Australia and New Zealand is that it could highlight political differences between the two groups. BRICS countries have been criticized for their lack of democratic values and their human rights records. However, there are also potential drawbacks to consider, particularly the increased competition with G7 countries and the potential for political tensions between the two groups. The G7 has traditionally been a powerful economic and political bloc, representing some of the world's most advanced and developed economies. However, in recent years, the G7 has faced challenges from emerging economies such as BRICS. If Australia and New Zealand were to join BRICS, this could further erode the dominance of the G7 and create increased competition between the two groups. This competition could manifest in several ways. For example, BRICS countries could potentially offer lower-cost goods and services, making it more challenging for G7 countries to compete. Additionally, BRICS countries could potentially offer more attractive investment opportunities, diverting investment away from G7 countries. In addition to the economic competition, a partnership between BRICS and Australia and New Zealand could also highlight political differences between the two groups. In conclusion, a potential partnership between BRICS and Australia and New Zealand could have significant benefits for both sides. Increased trade and investment opportunities, access to natural resources, increased collaboration on global issues, and strengthened regional ties are just some of the potential benefits of such a partnership.
I would laugh if this wasn't such a serious situation. Can you imagine what the benefits would be to New Zealand and Australia? Well, they were tested during this Corona 19 thing, where they actually imprisoning their own citizens for not wearing masks in public. It showed how tyrannical the enforcement powers could be. And now, did you notice the same propaganda that they have in each video? Not just the same clips, it's the same lie. They just changed the names of the countries. Do you think, in this one, they added, oh, they're going to take care of climate change and healthcare? Do you really think Communist China, a country that butchers its own people, locked them, welded their doors shut into these large apartment complexes, and let them starve to death and die, cares about climate change and your healthcare? How can you care about climate change if the crisis is, oh, we're burning fossil fuels, we're going to end civilization? That's a crock. BRICS people know it. Western culture better really catch on real quick. And this whole G7 thing. Crohn's visit, boot-licking little Frenchman, he needs to be called out. I think Germany went over there and tried to make some demands on China. They just get out of here. They don't care. And you better recognize that. You better recognize it now, before this is a complete jeopardy. Now, let's continue a little bit. Now, take a look at Venezuela, the stronghold in the Western Hemisphere.
Venezuela is a country that has been in crisis for several years. The country has been facing severe economic and political challenges that have led to a humanitarian crisis. The situation has been exacerbated by the imposition of sanctions by the United States and its allies. As a result, Venezuela has been seeking support from its allies, particularly Russia and China, who have been providing significant aid and investment in the country. This has led to speculation that Venezuela may join BRICS, a relationship tie between Russia and Venezuela. Russia has been a significant ally of Venezuela for several years. The two countries have strong economic, political, and military ties. Russia has been providing significant aid to Venezuela in the form of loans, military hardware, and technical expertise. The two countries have been collaborating on several projects including oil exploration, mining, and military training. Russia's support for Venezuela has been a significant factor in the country's ability to withstand the economic sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies. Russia has been providing significant financial aid to Venezuela, which has helped the country to stabilize its economy. In 2019, Russia provided a $6.5 billion loan to Venezuela, which was used to pay off the country's debts and improve its oil production. Russia's support for Venezuela has been a thorn in the side of the United States and its allies. The United States has been trying to isolate Russia, and Russia's support for Venezuela has been seen as a challenge to American hegemony in the region. As a result, the United States has imposed sanctions on Russia, which has led to a deterioration in relations between the two countries. However, despite global isolation, Russia's relations with Venezuela remain strong. Secondly, how has China and Venezuela relations been thus far? China has also been a significant ally of Venezuela. China has been providing significant financial aid to Venezuela, which has helped the country to stabilize its economy. China has been investing in Venezuela's oil industry, and the two countries have been collaborating on several infrastructure projects, including roads, railways, and ports. China's support for Venezuela has been driven by its need for oil. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, and China has been seeking to secure its energy supplies by investing in Venezuela's oil industry. China has also been seeking to expand its influence in the region, and its support for Venezuela has been seen as a challenge to American hegemony in the region. China has been providing significant aid to Venezuela in the form of loans. In 2018, China provided a $5 billion loan to Venezuela, which was used to stabilize the country's economy. China has also been providing technical expertise to Venezuela, which has helped the country to improve its oil production. According to Reuters, the reason for this omission was that the member nations could not agree on a common stance towards Venezuela. While China and Russia have supported the Venezuelan government, Brazil and India have recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's interim president. South Africa has maintained a neutral position. Some experts argue that the lack of consensus among the BRICS nations on Venezuela reflects broader divisions within the group, particularly on issues related to democracy and human rights. As Andrew Cooper, a political science professor at the University of Waterloo in Canada, explains, the idea that these countries are now on the same page and are going to work together in a united fashion seems to be diminishing. Others suggest that economic concerns may have played a role in the decision not to discuss Venezuela. As Oliver Stunkel, a professor of international relations at the Getulio Vargas Foundation in Brazil, notes, China has a big investment in Venezuela, and Brazil has been working hard to strengthen its economic ties with China. Overall, the absence of Venezuela from the 2019 BRICS summit agenda highlights the challenges facing the group as it seeks to balance its members' diverse interests and priorities. As China's Global Times put it, BRICS countries have to acknowledge their differences and find ways to cooperate despite them. Venezuela's membership in BRICS would provide the country with significant benefits. First, it would provide the country with a platform to challenge American hegemony in the region. The United States has been seeking to isolate Venezuela, and its membership in BRICS would provide the country with a significant counterbalance to American power in the region. Second, membership in BRICS would provide Venezuela with access to significant financial resources. The alliance has a combined GDP of over $18 trillion, and it represents a significant force in the global economy. Venezuela's membership in BRICS would provide the country with access to funding and investment opportunities that it might not otherwise have access to. Third, membership in BRICS would provide Venezuela with a platform to develop closer economic ties with other member countries. This could lead to increased trade and investment between Venezuela and other BRICS countries, which would help to diversify Venezuela's economy and reduce its reliance on oil exports. However, there are also several challenges that Venezuela would need to overcome before it could join BRICS. The first challenge is the country's economic and political instability. Venezuela is currently facing severe economic and political challenges, which have led to a humanitarian crisis. Before it can join BRICS, Venezuela would need to stabilize its economy and political situation. Secondly, the country's international isolation. The United States and its allies have imposed sanctions on Venezuela, which has led to a deterioration in its relations with the international community. Before it can join BRICS, Venezuela would need to improve its relations with the international community and address the concerns of its neighbors and allies. Moreover, it is important to note that BRICS countries have also shown interest in Venezuela. In 2018, Russia, China, and India expressed support for Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro and criticized the U.S. for its intervention in Venezuela's political crisis. This support from BRICS countries indicates that Venezuela has a strategic importance to them. China, in particular, has expressed interest in Venezuela's oil resources. Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves, and China has become its largest creditor. In recent years, China has provided Venezuela with billions of dollars in loans in exchange for oil. This has allowed Venezuela to continue to operate its oil industry despite the economic sanctions imposed by the United States. China's interest in Venezuela's oil resources is likely to continue, and this could lead to closer economic ties between the two countries. Russia, on the other hand, has been a longtime supporter of Venezuela. The two countries have a history of military and economic cooperation, and Russia has provided Venezuela with military equipment and technical assistance. Russia's interest in Venezuela is not limited to military cooperation. It also has an interest in Venezuela's oil resources and has been involved in several oil projects in the country. It is clear that its ties with Russia and China are likely to continue to play a significant role in its future.
That should be a lot. All of our enemies ran to Venezuela after a disputed election a disputed election where most likely the man who should have won didn't win for some strange reason. Start making the connections to connect the dots. They're providing military assistance, financial assistance. Monroe, Roosevelt, and Taft all combined. This is why we put the last things about those three doctrines, scholars, whatever you want to call them. We need to be strong in our hemisphere because we're being attacked. And what's it all over? Oil, the petrodollars, and commodities. So how could any presidential administration in the U.S. or any other free country go along with the fallacy of climate change? I've already shown you the proof. It's a short segment. We have so much more. We have showed you in previous shows about how none of this is science. There's a reason behind it. I have one more segment.
Yes, I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Perot. What will you do as president to open foreign markets to fair competition from American business and here at home from foreign countries so that we can bring jobs back to the United States?
That's right at the top of my agenda. We've shipped millions of jobs overseas, and we have a strange situation because we have a process in Washington where after you've served for a while, you cash in, become a foreign lobbyist, make $30,000 a month, then take a leave, work on presidential campaigns, make sure you got good contacts, and then go back out. Now, if you just want to get down to brass tacks, first thing you ought to do is get all these folks who've got these one-way trade agreements that we've negotiated over the years. You say, fellas, we'll take the same deal we gave you. And they'll gridlock right at that point because, for example, we've got international competitors who simply could not unload their cars off the ships if they had to comply. You see, if it was a two-way street, just couldn't do it. We have got to stop sending jobs overseas. To those of you in the audience who are business people, pretty simple. If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, pay $1 an hour for labor, hire a young 25, that's assuming you've been in business for a long time, you've got a mature workforce. Pay $1 an hour for your labor, have no health care, that's the most expensive single element, making a car, have no environmental controls, no pollution controls, and no retirement, and you don't care about anything but making money, there will be a giant sucking sound going south. So if the people send me to Washington, the first thing I'll do is study that 2,000-page agreement and make sure it's a two-way street. One last point here. I decided I was dumb and didn't understand it, so I called a who's who of the folks who've been around it. And I said, why won't everybody go south? They said, we'll be disruptive. I said, for how long? I finally got them up for 12 to 15 years. And I said, well, how does it stop being disruptive? And that is when their jobs come up from $1 an hour to $6 an hour and ours go down to $6 an hour, then it's leveled again. But in the meantime, you've wrecked the country with these kinds of deals. We got to cut it out.
Mr. Perot, what do you believe tonight is the single most important separating issue of this campaign?
I think the principal issue that separates me is that 5.5 million people came together on their own and put me on the ballot. I was not put on the ballot by either of the two parties. I was not put on the ballot by any PAC money, by any foreign lobbyist money, by any special interest money. This is a movement that came from the people. This is the way the framers of the Constitution intended our government to be, a government that comes from the people. Over time, we have developed a government that comes at the people, that comes from the top down, where the people are more or less treated as objects to be programmed during the campaign with commercials and media events and fear messages and personal attacks and things of that nature. The thing that separates my candidacy and makes it unique is that this came from millions of people in 50 states all over this country who wanted a candidate that worked and belonged to nobody but them. I go into this race as their servant. and I belong to them. So this comes from the people. Look at all three of us, decide who you think will do the job, pick that person in November, because believe me, as I've said before, the party's over and it's time for the cleanup crew. And we do have to have change, and people who never take responsibility for anything when it happens on their watch, and people who are in charge. The dollar's gone through the floor. Now, whose fault is that? Not the Democrats, not the Republicans. Somewhere out there's an extraterrestrial that's doing this to us, I guess. And everybody says they take responsibility. Somebody somewhere has to take responsibility for this. Now, just for the record, I don't have any spin doctors. I don't have any speech writers. Probably shows. I make those charts you see on television even. That shows.
So, what did Ross Perot just say there? The way our government was set up, without the corruption, without the lobbyists, it was put on the ballot by we the people. That was 1992. He told you. He said he doesn't have any spin doctors. He's talking from the pot. Who does he sound like? Who does he sound like? I mean, piece together everything you just heard. Previous segment. It shouldn't be too hard to figure out what's going on here. In our last segment, we're going to expose to you how the enemies of freedom, the Constitution, and the rights of free people all over the world, how they intend to take them down, take them away, and how they intend to maintain their power and control over the whole human race. So it will be lost forever. No sensationalism here. This isn't drama. This is fact, all facts that can be supported. With that, we'll see you in section 6.